Welcome back, and I know this looks really different, am I right? I'm on holiday right now, but of course I couldn't shoot like 5 or 6 videos in advance because there are some things that I have to address on the spot, the news.
Hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right, because then I start to taste them. I say, and then I start to smell them, so it's like a smell that tastes like other. So I knew something was wrong, I knew something special about it.
No! God, please, no!
Today we're talking about House of the Dragon.
History does not remember blood. It remembers names.
I'm really excited about it. I actually read the book of which it is based on, which is called Fire and Blood. And it is a bit of a different book if you compare it to Game of Thrones because it is a non-narrative historical text that basically sums up all the different things that different masters and different people have written across the history of Westeros, trying to create basically a storybook when it comes to the Targaryen family and how they influenced the growth of Westeros as we know it today. The books, because there are 2 technically and the second one isn't out yet, span across 300 years and basically they should end with the fall of Aerys II, which is where basically Game of Thrones started for us. In this video here I want to look at the source material. I want to try to find out whether the new series is actually gonna be worth the hype, every single thing that they should avoid if they want to create a coherent story, whether it wants to be a perfect adaptation or whether it wants to reinvent itself. I feel like we've learned quite a lot since the last seasons of Game of Thrones.
Mind if I come with?
Why should I bring you?
Because I can warg. Ooh, that felt so good. I have this cool power, but I'm not positive how to use it yet.
And this is why we're here. I want to find out whether this is actually going to be as good as we hope it is or whether we should keep our hopes down and calm the fuck down because we cannot be burned once again because Game of Thrones was incredibly disappointing at the end of the day, mostly because it was so incredibly good.
He saw some of the things that I saw and it wasn't just a prequel for prequel's sake. There was actually a reason to tell this story.
It really was seeing it through a different perspective that interested me.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
So what is House of the Dragon? This season is made of 10 episodes. They will be released on a weekly basis, which is really good in my opinion, because this is what will create that kind of attention span that audiences have been accustomed to when it comes to Game of Thrones or when it comes to those kind of really high budget conspiracy action adventure series. I think it works quite well, and I definitely think that that should be the standard when it comes to fantasy series because they tend to cost quite a lot, and if the audiences, if the fans don't talk about every single episode on Twitter, it will be forgotten as fast as possible. Look at Stranger Things, for example. No one is talking about it anymore, and it's a bit sad because it was an incredible season and they spent so much money on it.
Hey, hello, Chrissy, hello, hey, Chrissy, wake up, wake up.
Big difference when it comes to this series here and the one that we know of when it comes to Game of Thrones. This was actually co-created with the original writer of the books, so George R. R. Martin and Ryan J. Condal.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Let me smash, please. Hey girl, you want some tail?
That could also be a sign of whether the series itself is going to be high quality TV, because I'm pretty sure that Game of Thrones stopped being good as soon as they ran out of source material, and it is quite obvious that George R. R. Martin was not that involved with the ending, or that maybe they didn't listen to him at all because the ending that we got was and felt incredibly rushed.
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
Oh, that's not so much. So?
When it comes to the official pitch of House of the Dragon, it says that the series will chronicle the beginning of the end of the House Targaryen and a specific event which is called Dance of the Dragons. That event there takes place around 2 years. In the book itself, it goes from 129 AC to 131 AC. When I was reading the book, I was actually quite surprised they decided to adapt that specific part of the book, because there is so much more interesting stuff at the beginning of the conquest itself with Aegon I, and of course with his two queens slash sisters. Like, there is so much content when it comes to just the first few pages when it comes to the conquest itself and the creation of the kingdom of Westeros as we know it today, that you could have literally made seasons upon seasons of just war and destruction and rebirth, and the creation of so many things that we know. For example, the creation of the Red Keep, the creation of King's Landing as well, of course, because it was not really anything special at the beginning of their history, and the creation of other things that we know as well when it comes to Maegor's Holdfast, when it comes to the Dragon Pit itself, even though I'm pretty sure that in Game of Thrones the Dragon Pit doesn't exist anymore, but it will not be explained within House of the Dragon why it doesn't exist anymore, because even in the book itself it is not mentioned. But I'm pretty sure that they will get rid of it, because after a while and by the end of the Dance of the Dragons, most of the dragons will actually start disappearing.
You should have gone for the head.
I don't want to give that many spoilers when it comes to this video here. This is not going to be me speculating about what kind of changes they're going to be doing in between the book and the series itself. I just want to try to see what kind of mistakes they shouldn't be doing and what needs to be changed for the book to actually work as source material.
Have you never imagined yourself on the Iron Throne? Duty? Where is sacrifice? Now they see you as you are.
One of the first few things that needs to be changed, for example, is the idea that, as I said before, this is a non-narrative historical book, meaning that it goes really fast from one succession to the other, one Targaryen to the other, from one betrayal, from one small war, from the first Dornish war to the second, to the third, and to the fourth, to all of these different castles being burnt down, to all these different alliances being created and being dismantled almost as quickly, because without even noticing 10 years have passed, with children being on the Iron Throne and having regents that actually have the power on the Iron Throne itself, and a couple of pages later they will be 16 and they will actually be in power.
You're talking to a king! I'm telling Mother, you can't. How many bastards does he have running?
There will be so many different wars taking place with the three sisters, the Stepstones. There will be stuff going on with Bravos and Pentos as well. And there will be a couple of things going on with Dorne, even within this book here, Dorne remains one of those regions that remains kind of unexplored, and it's a bit of a shame again. I feel like George R. R. Martin could have taken the advantage to explore that place a lot more and to maybe create some links with the Martells themselves. When it comes to the big families, there are so many interesting families that we know because they are apparent in the Game of Thrones series itself, but there are also so many families that were incredibly strong back then, so within the Targaryen rule in the first 300 years, and that have started disappearing because of just so many different battles and wars and the destruction of their succession. One example would be the Gardeners, for example, which is a family that is related to the Tyrells, for example. There are some families like the Hightowers, which are not really present in the Game of Thrones series, if I'm not mistaken, but it is a really important family within the old Citadel. There are others as well, but I can't really talk about them because if I tell you that those houses will disappear, then it's kind of a spoiler because you already know that most of them will be dying, right?
Hey, I need you to cause a distraction. Holy shit. We're all gonna die! There's a spaceship!
But anyways, when it comes to the synopsis of this season here, because this is just the synopsis for this season, let's have a look at it and then I'll give you my thoughts. The first thing that I noticed is that the trailer itself focuses really on the first 2, maybe 3 episodes, because from the look that we got in the trailer, it looks like the main struggle is gonna be in between Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon, which is not the case at all when it comes to Dance of the Dragons. But this is actually very clear if you look at different interviews, if you look at the official synopsis that has come out. And this is it. Unlike Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon will be non-linear, jumping between events separated by about 20 years. This begins with the day Viserys names his firstborn daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, as the Princess of Dragonstone, even has his urge to take a second wife in hopes of producing a son. So here enters Alicent Hightower, the family I was talking about before, which is incredibly powerful, and I think it's probably one of the richest families in Westeros, maybe second to the Lannisters once again. And Alicent Hightower is, by the way, the Queen of the Hand himself. The series will then follow how the question of succession and the misogyny of a realm's lords who fear seeing a woman ascend the Iron Throne and how it can lead to war. And basically Prince Daemon, he's the brother of Prince Viserys, and it is very obvious in the book itself, this is not really a spoiler, as I said before, Prince Viserys never wanted Prince Daemon to be his successor when it comes to the Iron Throne, and he's told them on several occasions, and Prince Daemon has not actually been really angry at him. Across the book, basically across the history itself, he will try to gain access to the Iron Throne without actually being aggressive towards his brother, which is something that is quite interesting, because if we look back at Targaryen history, we've got 2 brothers who actually were being aggressive towards each other. If you think about Maegor the Cruel, which is a really cool character that appears within the first few chapters of the book Fire and Blood, and his brother Aenys, who was considered to be a really weak king. And that dynamic, of course, is not really recreated here between Prince Viserys and Prince Daemon. So Prince Daemon in this series will be a passive, but also someone who is lurking in the shadows, trying to create a succession for himself or for his children to the Iron Throne, instead of actively trying to kill his brother, for example. Of course, a good thing that we all love about Game of Thrones, it's all the plot and machinations, it's all the betrayals, and the Dance of the Dragons has a lot of that stuff. But I was kind of surprised that they didn't go more back in history when it comes to the stuff I was talking about before with Maegor the Cruel. The cool thing about this series here, and the cool thing about the Targaryens themselves, is that it's one of the only families that keeps fighting within itself. I mean, there is that thing when it comes to Game of Thrones, as soon as a Targaryen is born, you toss a coin in the air, and whatever it lands, it will either be someone who is incredibly crazy or someone who is really good for the realm. And this is exactly Targaryen history 101. The thing that is really cool when it comes to the beginning of the Targaryen era is that, of course, as you know, Targaryens used to marry each other within the family, so sister to sister and brother to brother. No, not actually brother to brother.
I am Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons. Is there a problem here?
No problem, really. I just didn't know the 7 kingdoms had any, strong, beautiful persons of color. Did I get that right?
The White Walkers are on their way.
How do we know you're telling the truth?
Because they sent a very White Walker ahead.
Excuse me, do you know if Costco has any of those Tommy Bahama beach chairs left?
But brother to sister and brother to cousin and that kind of stuff, to keep the blood of the dragon as pure as possible. In the beginning of their history within Westeros, and they had an incredible amount of resistance coming from the church, because of course the church didn't want them to do that, because it was considered to be an abomination. And around the same time as Maegor the Cruel, there are, for example, 2 Targaryens, a brother and a sister, who get married and they aspire to the throne themselves, but there are other factions who belong to the church themselves, like the warrior sons, and it creates really interesting dynamics where you really see how incredibly powerful the church is within this universe here. And of course, after years and years of rebellion, the Targaryens are kind of destroying so many people because they want to continue to procreate in this way. And at the end of the day, there is actually someone who accepts that, and they create create a weird rule which is called like the rule of exceptionalism, meaning that since the Targaryens go back to old Valyria, they are not Andals, meaning that the rules really don't apply to them because they're not the same kind of human that the Westerosi are. And that is basically one rule that will be applied across the entire Targaryen lineage, and that is something that will definitely not be apparent, for example, within this series itself, unless they decided to add it, but I don't think so. And it would be a bit of a shame because I feel like the most interesting stuff within the final few seasons of Game of Thrones actually were relating to the church itself and to the fact that they managed to group and gather so many incredibly fanatic people who were ready to do anything to be able to stop this abomination and stuff like that. And it's scary and it works quite well, even though there is something going on within the end of the Dance of the Dragons with a character who is called the Shepherd, but it's not really related to religion as much as people like in King's Landing are so fucking tired of just dying and being threatened, and they will decide to just do some kind of uprising without spoiling too much. It's really, really cool. When it comes to one major change that appears in the series itself and that it kind of created a controversy a couple of months ago and even across the years, if you want to say, it's the change of skin color when it comes to a specific family. It is the Valerian, but it makes sense at the end of the day because especially if they come like the Targaryens from old Valyria. The Valerians, by the way, are one of the oldest families. They actually came to Westeros before the Targaryens themselves, and their siege is Driftmark, and a really important figure within the series itself would be Corlys Velaryon, who is called the Sea Snake, and it's a really, really cool character because these are basically the best versions of the people from the Iron Islands, so the Krakens, you know, because they're incredibly proficient when it comes to their fleet. People actually used to say the Targaryens ruled the sky with their dragons and the Velaryons ruled the sea with their fleet. So it is two really important families, and it is kind of interesting to portray with black skin, of course, and it feels quite well at the end of the day. I really don't understand why people have been so incredibly annoyed about it. People have been using such incredibly stupid arguments.
Enjoy the refreshing taste of diet racism. The same sweet ignorance of regular racism, but with none of the guilt or self-awareness.
You know I'm not racist, but I would never date an Asian guy. Ugh.
And if you want to go back now to the book itself and to the struggles of adapting something like Fire and Blood, one of the things I was talking about before is the fact that this is an historical book, right? It focuses on the most important things, even though it is really still pushing that kind of George R.R. Martin humor and irony, especially when it comes to dramatic irony. And it's kind of interesting on who is telling the story, and sometimes we get two different versions of the same story just because one master has a different sense of humor of another, and it's kind of interesting if we look at it through that perspective. But the thing is, this book here really lacks personality, really lacks characters that are memorable, but not because this book is not well written, just because it focuses on the key historical aspects. Right? There are so many people succeeding each other, so many names that are repeated. Within the Dance of the Dragons, for example, if you look just at how many Targaryens there are, if you look, for example, at Viserys' father, who is Jaehaerys, and Queen Alysanne, they have made 13 children.
Get him!
I mean, they don't all survive, of course, but just to tell you that within the Dance of the Dragons, and especially in this specific period here, when you talk about the fact that this is the highest power of the Targaryens, it is mostly because there's just a shit ton of Targaryens everywhere. The big difference as well with this historical time and the past, and this is also why I think they decided to go with this specific period here, it's that they are starting not to be as incestuous as at the beginning of the conquest and across those years there. They are starting to create alliances with other families, with the High Towers, as I said before, when it comes to Viserys' second wife. And of course, when it comes to the Valerian, of course, when it comes to the people from the Vale as well. And basically the power within Westeros is slowly shifting and dividing across so many different places. And it's really interesting because at the beginning of the book, basically most of the families that we knew from Game of Thrones weren't actually participating in most of the wars because they didn't really have any stake, because at the end of the day they were not close enough to the power that it was interesting for them to participate in certain wars. The Lannisters, for example, and the Starks and the Tullys, they don't really take part on a lot of the different wars in the first 100 years after the conquest, and that's mainly because, as I said before, the Targaryens were just either fucking each other or fucking the Valerians. So there was no purpose to fight for them, because at the end of the day they were not getting closer and closer to power. But here, within this time period here, everyone is trying to put their hand on the gold and try to keep it there for as long as possible. So this is probably why they chose this specific time period. The Lannisters are there, the Stark are there as well, and really cool character played by Cregan Stark, who appears mostly towards the end of the Dance of the Dragons. I have no idea how many seasons this is gonna be. I'm pretty sure they will not be able to do the entire Dance of the Dragons in one season, mostly because there is a lot of things happening, a lot of different battles, but as I said before, a lot of different Targaryens and characters killing each other, a lot of different queens or queens to be, or queens who never were, if you think about Princess Rhaenys, who is married to Corlys Velaryon, having children, and the children having stakes on the succession of the Iron Throne, and the children having sometimes the same name as predecessors who are actually on the Iron Throne. So it's really confusing, and I feel like it would be really hard if they do everything in one season.
What is this brief mortal life, if not the pursuit of legacy?
For me, you could do everything correctly in 3 seasons. And the 3rd season would finish basically with the end of the Dance of the Dragons, the repercussions, and basically I cannot give you the end of the Dance of the Dragons because it's a huge spoiler. I cannot tell you who is gonna win, of course. But just because there are so many incredible machinations going on, it would be impossible to do it in one season. So first thing that you need to keep in mind, they have to do it in 2 or 3 seasons if they wanted to do it correctly. Otherwise it will feel rushed. Otherwise there will not be enough character development for us to care about any specific family. You have to think that when it comes to this time of Westeros history, there are all the families that we know from Game of Thrones. But as I said before, there are even more. So there are more families, there are more stakes, there are more people who are actually trying to get the power of the Iron Throne, right? And of course there are more dragons. There is a shit ton of dragons in this period of time here, more dragons than there has ever been across the entire Targaryen ruling, and everyone wants a dragon, of course. One thing that of course they need to avoid, as I said before, is just a lot of different references to things that we know, like the creation of the Kingsguard, the creation of the Small Council, the creation of the Red Keep, and all of the other stuff that basically we know of already. This is the kind of nostalgia that we don't want to. It's the kind of nostalgia that Star Wars does over and over again. Marvel does it a bit less, but Star Wars really does it a lot when it comes to, do you want to know how Solo got his name? Do you want to know how that character got that specific color of lightsaber? Do you want to know where that guy got his spaceship and how that guy was born on that planet before it exploded? Then we're gonna show you and tell you.
Feel something? You feel it? Yes, I feel that's the force. Really? Wow, it must be really strong. Oh, I've never felt any.
I don't want this season to do that. This would be a major mistake, and I really hope they don't do it. One thing that we will be seeing when it comes to this series here, and that we didn't really get to see within Game of Thrones, I mean, we got to see it in some kind of way, but it was not well done. I'm talking about dragons fighting other dragons, which will look incredibly cool. And within the Dance of the Dragons, the dragons will play an incredibly important part within the series itself. They all have different personalities as well, they all have different names, and they all look completely different when it comes to the colors, when it comes to the scale. There are of course dragons that are incredibly huge, like Balerion and Vagar, who are really old dragons who date almost back at the conquest when it comes to Aegon himself, and those are going to be the most ferocious dragons. And of course it's going to be incredibly sad when you see them slowly fall to the ground one by one, because yes, most of the dragons, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but most of the dragons will die in one way or another.
You slut dragon! You slut!
Chill out, dude.
Okay, that's... You don't have to...
Shame on you! Shame, you slutty,
Why the does it feel like you're whipping me?
And George R. R. Martin actually was able to create a lot of different scenarios on how these dragons die. Same goes for the dragon riders, of course. It never feels repetitive. This is really an incredible praise I can do about this book here. Even though if it is, as I said before, a lot of different names of Targaryens succeeding each other and making as many children as possible, it never really feels formulaic. It never really feels George R. R. Martin is repeating himself, repeating the same beats when it comes to the stories. He really managed to create completely different personalities. He really managed to create completely different backstories and context when it comes to all of these different kings and queens who are trying to rule a different version of Westeros every single time. And it's incredibly interesting. So the material is really rich. The material has a lot of interesting things that we can develop in the series itself. I am a bit worried because, as you know, of course, this is just the first of a two-part book, right? And the second part will never come out because George R. R. Martin clearly said that he's working right now on Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, I think it's called, the last book in the series. And only then he said that he will be finishing basically the Targaryen history, so the second book. Meaning that we're stuck once again when it comes to this series here.
Gonna smash their head in like this!
So I'm pretty sure that if they want to do this, they will just do Dance of the Dragons and they will wait maybe for him to create another book. That's my opinion. I think it's the best way of doing it at the end of the day. There is some interesting things happening after the Dance of the Dragons, but it really feels like we're going towards something that looks like peace, which is something that we got before. The interesting things when it comes to the Targaryen ruling is that there is a lot of different, basically waves of peace and war, peace and war, peace and war, with a couple of battles in the peaceful moment as well, of course, specifically talking about stuff that is going on within the Iron Islands, stuff that is going on within Dorne, and with the Stepstones, the Three Sisters, and Bravos and Pentos, and those kind of places there. And it works quite well, to be honest. It never feels repetitive because even though we are looking at certain locations multiple times, when it comes to Harrenhal, for example, we will not be able to get to see the destruction of Harrenhal because it's something that happens very early in the Targaryen ruling, but it is incredibly cool. It's a really cool scene. But I'm saying this mostly because it is always interesting to create that kind of tension when it comes to the Game of Thrones stuff, right? And I feel like if they actually keep going with the series itself, beyond Dance of the Dragons, they will get stuck with the peaceful moments. They will get stuck with trying to portray winter in Westeros. They will get stuck with trying to portray different diseases and plagues which are destroying the economy and those kind of things that don't really feel very interesting, and the show will start dragging.
Damn it, Wade!
So I feel like the best option is just do Dance of the Dragon and then maybe move on to a more interesting span of time once the second book is out. Because what comes right after Dance of the Dragon is yet another moment of not really peace, but everything coming back to a status quo. Same as before the Dance of the Dragon, before Viserys as well, we had the best kings in Westeros history when it comes to the Targaryens, which is King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne. And they ruled for like 50 years or something like that. They were known as the good king and then the old king later on in their lives. They changed so many different laws. They created and innovated a lot of stuff when it comes to Westeros history, and then we moved to the Dance of the Dragons. Just saying that, you know, that stuff with the peace, it's interesting, but you can see why it would not make for an interesting show, right? One thing that I really like when it comes to this series is that it will be really feminist, because the struggle within the Fire and Blood book is really about men and women trying to get to power. There is, for example, a moment within the book itself where there has been so many different wars that most of the male heirs of the most important families in Westeros have died, or they are incredibly young children, and the women are starting to rule. And it's incredibly interesting, of course, when it comes to that. There are a lot of important figures that maybe we might get to discover by the end of the Dance of the Dragons, which you will like quite a lot. Just saying that this series here might be even more of a feminist spin on fantasy medieval shows than Game of Thrones was back then. Especially if you look at characters like Daenerys. At the end of the day, she was completely destroyed, which is a bit of a sad thing, right? We liked Daenerys, we liked Dany.
Best season ever!
It's interesting because when it comes to problems with the succession of the Targaryens themselves on the Iron Throne, this is not the first time that it happens, and it happened actually with the coronation of Viserys himself, because their succession was a bit muddy once again when it comes to Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne's successors. And what they did is that they created a council of all the lesser and bigger families of Westeros, trying to decide who had the better claim when it comes to the Iron Throne. And at the end of the day, the throne was given to Viserys, and there were no actually wars because it was decided in the most democratic way possible, which is kind of cool. And the other contenders, by the way, just in case you want to know, were Princess Rhaenys and her husband Corlys Velaryon. So it is still related to the story that we're talking about today. Just to tell you that basically Princess Rhaenys and Corlys Velaryon have already been really close to going on the Iron Throne themselves when it comes to them, but also when it comes to their children, because of course they were trying to rule in the favor of the male children. But I'm pretty sure that that kind of jealousy will be present within the Dance of the Dragons themselves, and especially on who they decide to support, whether one faction or the other. I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but I'm pretty sure that you know that it will happen at some point, because how can there be a war for succession if the king is still alive, right? So King Viserys actually dies at some point within the book itself, but he dies at 55 years old due to sickness. It is not really said that it was some kind of conspiracy, that he was poisoned or something like that. He really felt within the book that he just died of natural causes. And I feel like that would be kind of boring. And I'm pretty sure that they will not do it like that within the series itself. I'm pretty sure he was gonna be poisoned, or he will die in suspicious ways, so that the muddy succession can start as fast as possible. Also, I'm saying this mostly because the actor that they chose to play King Viserys doesn't look to be in his 50s at all. This is something that has to do with action-adventure series. You want to be as entertaining as possible, and someone dying of natural causes is not as interesting. It kind of reminds me of the death that started the Game of Thrones series itself, right? He technically died during like a hunting accident, but who actually spiked his wine? Am I right? I hope it will be something cool like that, because I don't want to just see him die because of old age. It would be incredibly boring. I'm really glad that they're giving this series as much budget as possible to shine. It looks even better than Game of Thrones now that I think about it. The thing that I want this series to explore a little bit more is I want to see new things. I don't just want to be in King's Landing. I don't just want to be in the different places that we already know. I want us to travel to different places. Places that we've seen within the Game of Thrones books themselves, that we didn't really get the chance to see with the series itself. Think about Corlys Velaryon, for example. He's called the Sea Snake because he's been on 9 exploration voyages across his entire life, and this is even before getting married to the Targaryen princess and being all mixed up with all these kind of succession problems that will go on within the series. Just saying that it will be interesting to see some of these characters live their own lives, so that we can get some character development, so we can get to explore different things, especially because the series itself, as they said, it's not gonna be linear, it's gonna be jumping back and forth in time. I hope they don't do too many flashbacks to Aegon's conquest or a past that looks too far away, but I do hope that they use that time to make us invested in these different characters, especially because there are so many, and they have sometimes really incredible and interesting backstories. Having said that, this is all I have to say when it comes to House of the Dragon. This is an incredibly long video, I'm pretty sure.
So good and tasty.
and I really enjoyed reading the book. I finished it just a couple of days ago. I was rushing it as much as possible because I wanted to be in front of the camera and talk about it as long as possible. Okay, this video is coming out a week before the release of the series and the first episode itself. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the trailer, if you read the book as well, and what your theories are. You can give me spoilers in the comments, I don't really mind. I've read the book anyways, but just put on spoiler alert, because something that we really like about Game of Thrones is being surprised, right? And I don't want to spoil the most important things when it comes to this here. I feel like it's gonna be a really incredible ride, and I'm really happy to be doing it since the very beginning, since I got to like Game of Thrones when basically the hype started going down, and I was never really able to be part of the fandom, and now I finally am. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every single like that you drop will go to your favorite dragon within the Dance of the Dragons storyline. Personally, I really like Balerion the Black Dread. It looks scary as fuck. Favorite dragon? Yes. I'm Patrick, and this is Torn Apart.
Yes, there is something I want to ask you. All right. How the fuck do you write so many books so fast?
So what are we gonna do now?
Ass to ass.
Ass to ass!
Da 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 da. Da 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 da.